HVAC 360 is brought to you today by new from Gantt Chart Games is their latest app, BIM Blocks. Not a contractor and don't even play one on TV? Well, you're in luck. This app will allow you to build to your heart's content. For each new construction level, you'll perform tasks like jumping through hoops, deciphering plans, chasing down missing orders, corralling contractors, beating the construction clock, and so much more. If you get too good, you can even add on the expert OSHA and Mother Nature expansion packs. Get building today. Play BIM Blocks. Hey, what's up? Welcome back. This is episode number 103. Matt Nelson here, your host for HVAC 360, helping you be the best and the brightest in the field of HVAC. How do we do that? We do that by sharing lessons. You should know this by now. Sharing lessons from my experience in the field and talking to industry experts. But we really don't stop there. I encourage you to double down on your weekly dose of HVAC knowledge and join the growing community of HVAC heads just like you. Go over to my website at HVAC360.com and sign up for the newsletter. I push out something every Friday for people to sink their teeth into, a little extra for the week. So, what's up for this episode? This episode, I get to answer a listener question about engineering and building commissioning. He's a younger engineer, and he had some questions. And I sense that this was a topic that was a little opaque for some younger individuals or people who don't really know about the industry too much. So I thought I'd give a try and explaining it. But first, I'd like to congratulate and give a big shout out to one of our listeners, Nestor, who posted a review on Apple Podcast. Thank you, Nestor. I'm keeping up my end of the bargain. You did yours. Thank you so much for giving that recommendation and your review. All right, so let's get to the first question. First question was, how and why did you get into commissioning compared to a mechanical engineer? All right, well, I guess I have to first start off by saying that when I got out of school, I didn't, as a mechanical engineer, I didn't even know this field existed until I interviewed for my first HVAC job. It still boggles my mind that it just didn't hit me. I didn't know if I was slow or what, and I guess I just didn't grow up around other people who were contractors. I'm sure if I knew somebody who was a contractor, it would have dawned on me sooner than later, but that didn't happen. Now, I guess as a engineer, I guess there's two typical paths. So let me first talk about kind of the two choices that we have here, engineering and commissioning. Now, in the engineering field, you typically come from a schooling background. So you've gone through engineering school. A lot of times you can have maybe even an associate's degree or a mechanical technology degree or a full-blown mechanical engineering degree from a university, college, what have you. Now, you can either go directly into being an engineer, or you can actually, I know some people who actually went into contracting for a while and then switched back to become an engineer. That way, that kind of gave them a little bit of experience. I don't know if it was necessarily a particularly premeditated career path that they chose, but that's how they got into the HVAC engineering field. Now, on the other side, with commissioning, a lot of people go into commissioning once they've gone through engineering a little bit. That was my path. You can also, if you're a test and balance contractor, a lot of times, since there are a lot of educational classes that you can take along with test and balance, a lot of those kind of go hand in hand. So a lot of people in the test and balance world really, start getting into commissioning. They have a great understanding of how systems are starting to work and things like that. I know that's the case. I don't know necessarily if you get all the confidence that you need as a test and balance guy going into commissioning. I think that there's probably something that you're missing. I guess in any of these fields that you get into commissioning with, you're probably missing a couple core competencies that you'd feel a lot better and a lot more comfortable with if you had them. And I know I've talked about that a couple of times. Now, you can also get into it through controls. I've known people who've done that. Since a lot of commissioning is heavily focused on HVAC, you're going to go through controls and you're going to intimately know what you're supposed to, what you'd anticipate. You might not know the engineering, you might not know the test and balance, but you know the controls, and so you have that comfort level at the end. Now, regardless of which path you took to become a commissioning authority, really, your key skills there, again, are still communication and just being able to work with others. It's really that sort of those are kind of your best assets and your best soft skills going into commissioning. So, where did in the whole thing, why did I get into commissioning? Why go from engineering to commissioning? Well, when I started out as an engineer, I got my PE, and I really, it wasn't until about 2004, 2005, so egads, 14 years ago or so, that I had first heard about commissioning. And, I thought it was one of those things that it had a lot of opportunities. I knew it was, kind of like the latest and greatest, best thing since sliced bread kind of opportunities. They were kind of few and far between, and it really wasn't there wasn't a huge demand at the time. LEED was just starting. Around that time, LEED is just starting to kick in a little bit more, requiring buildings be commissioned. But I don't think that was kind of, at least where I was at, that wasn't a big pusher. So, again, why? I started to really hate drawings. Or hate drawings. I don't hate drawings. I love drawings. I love to look at them, flip through them. No, that wasn't the point. I really hated drawing. Doing CAD. I didn't do any BIM. Ironically, with the cold open, the fake advertisement, I topped it off with BIM. But I really haven't done any BIM drawing. But I was just getting kind of burned out, staring at a screen for, hours at a time, just kind of drawing lines, drawing things, getting things together. And it was really starting to wear on me. And it's really funny because it's like, as an engineer, I think it's kind of ironic that how little you need to know about equipment. Say, for instance, a boiler. You need to know kind of like, what type of boiler you want. You need to figure out what the input is, the output is, what the typical detail and what the sequence is that might be surrounding it. But, I was listening to a video the other day, and I was just kind of blown away by the subtle nuances. And this was for, the difference between a wet back boiler and a dry back boiler, and, the number of passes and what's important and what's not important. So it really was kind of eye-opening when I was listening to that, just these different subtle nuances about the boiler. And that kind of got me a little bit juiced about learning more about boilers and exactly how they operate and things like that. But, as a typical engineer, you didn't have time to really dive in depth, or it didn't dawn on me to dive really in depth to figure out what those subtle differences was. Once you picked a piece of equipment, you got the ins and the outs, you got it sized correctly, you put it in there, you connected it up, you got the detail, you got the sequence, and boom, you're done. You walk away. Okay? The only next thing would be to, go ahead and, watch it get installed. But, that was about it. So, and even though I was kind of working in a construction office at the time, I didn't really get out in the field as much as I wanted to. I really like the process of construction. I just like to watch it, being built. If I ever find videos of saying, hey, watch this as they build it and they have it on fast forward, I can't stop myself from watching the whole construction process just being built. I'm so fascinated. And it's, there's a lot of details that, I'm interested in the details of why they do things. And I think that's a lot of, what engineers may take for granted is that, there's these contractors out there and they all do things for a reason. Generally speaking, when they talk about the best practices that they work with, they all do something for a reason. And it's really kind of fascinating, all these reasons that, you just didn't think about as an engineer. So that was kind of why I was starting to get, I started wanting to get away from engineering and more towards commissioning. And as most stories go, I actually caught a break that one of the company I was working with, they had an opening as the commissioning manager in the office. So since I had enough experience, I could find my way and get into that and take it over. I really didn't have any staff; it was just me. And man, from day one, this was your typical baptism by fire. I knew nothing. So I was looking around for resources, trying to develop, what commissioning plan was, get the commissioning, reports, the commissioning forms, everything. I was starting from scratch and just trying to learn a lot about that. Now, I'm kind of a form nerd, so I like kind of developing forms. I think my forms look better than a lot of people's, but I think, and that's part of communication too. You like to communicate clearly. I think the form does a lot of that for you. So spending a little extra time playing with your arts and crafts and just trying to develop a nice form goes a long way. So obviously, that's how and why I got into commissioning. That doesn't necessarily help you if you're a young engineer, or even just getting into engineering, and you want to get into commissioning. It's really kind of an uphill battle. You really have to have that opportunity, find that opportunity of getting in. You might, if you're just fresh out of school, I think the best way to get into engineering is either get into commissioning rather, is getting to an engineering firm and working your way up, some firm that has commissioning, and then just trying to get a transfer internally into that department. A lot of firms are just going to hire commissioning guy or new engineers and not necessarily commissioning people, because they think and they see, and rightfully so, that commissioning is one of those that you really have to know what you're doing to be able to start commissioning. I think one caveat there, and I think that in general, if you have a larger firm that has, a lot of commissioning people in their department, I think that would be an opportunity where they might be able to take a risk on getting somebody in there that knows absolutely nothing and training them how they want to have them trained from within. I think that's an opportunity, but I don't really see a lot of those. That's the problem is when you look at the industry as a whole, it's a lot of individuals. Now, in competing with other firms from time to time, I've had the experience that everybody kind of commissions differently. Even though we follow the same, guideline 0, everybody commissions differently. So you might have my personal belief where I take it from, design or wherever we start the project, design through construction and into operations. And I'll follow that all the way through just because I think it offers the best consistency for the client. But I know that there was firms out there that had multiple people and maybe had a couple engineers that would also do commissioning, but that wasn't their full-time work. They were designers that would kind of moonlight, so to speak, on these commissioning jobs, and they would go out there and do commissioning. So what you'd have at certain points in the construction process, you'd have all these people just go there and take a look at the commissioning and then do their reports and then step back. Ultimately, you're still going to have that the person that's in charge of a commissioning project. So that is even though other people were involved, they'd kind of fall off, and he'd be running with the ball, or she'd be running with the ball for the rest of the project. And to be able to get it done, chasing down little details, because a lot of time is spent waiting for construction to, finish. I'm dealing with that now. I mean, it could be delayed months. So, I mean, when you're talking about going from design to construction, there's a lot of different projects that you have to juggle at the same time. So there's just, that's a big time sink, and you want as few people sucked into that time sink as possible. So that's where you have that point person that his job or her job is to be able to watch that happen. All right, so again, some of the common traits that will serve you well is to being able to verbally communicate, write clearly, be detail oriented, be a self-starter, knowledgeable enough about the systems, and understand the reality of the construction. Now, I think I've went over that before, and obviously, maybe it's a presentation that I've made, or maybe I made it in another previous podcast. But ultimately, knowledge isn't a big component of what's going to make you a good commissioning authority. But actually, it's the thirst for knowledge that makes you a better one. So, I mean, it takes more than a paper pusher to make a good commissioning agent, but having those skills and being able to tolerate the amount of paperwork that we have to deal with is one of the kind of the litmus tests between you wanting to tap out and you kind of trying to continue on this journey. So I guess let's talk about some of the pros and cons on either side. So on the pro side for commissioning, what I like about it, I like to be working on multiple projects. It gives me that perspective, those field lessons learned that I like to share with you. I get to learn about a lot of them because we have multiple projects going on at the same time. So there's a lot of different things always popping up, and I can kind of take that from one job, share it to another, and kind of cross-pollinate all these ideas about how to do things better. I like traveling, to an extent. I don't like necessarily traveling on airplanes to other places. I think that there's, a lot of, that has its place. But all in all, when you're doing commissioning projects, if you're flying someplace, I think that there's probably somebody better, closer, more local, to be able to serve that client better. Ultimately, I like to travel a couple hours at most, but that allows me some time, some dashboard time, so I get to listen to podcasts, listen to books, get caught up on things like that, and I also actually get to learn in that process. So I get to know contractors a little bit better, a little bit deeper than you would just visiting them once or twice as an engineer, not necessarily building a relationship. And it's nice to be able to say, I have a project now where it's like you go into the trailer and, hey, there's two people you already knew from a previous project. You're like, hey, it's like a reunion. So you really get to meet these guys. And as long as you're a good performer, a good commissioning authority, it's something that you'll get that good reception. If you're not, then it's going to be crickets and awkward silences when you get to a new project and figure out who's working it for some of these construction managers and general contractors. So I think that's, just being able to learn from these people as well. You get to ask them questions. They don't have an expectation that you know everything. As a commissioning authority, you shouldn't be putting off these vibes that you know everything. And you should always be open to, hey, what you've been doing, how do you do it? And just use their knowledge and resources to kind of get some questions answered. So what I don't like about it, I don't like the paperwork. I'm tolerant of the paperwork, but that's not my favorite activity. I don't, a lot of times that just gets, it's a grind. Writing reports and getting through them, even though that I'm, okay to good at them, it still doesn't make it better. So those are some of the cons. The timing of projects and really being susceptible to those delays, that's really aggravating. It's really, you like to be able to bid on something, say, hey, you know what, I'm going to get this money by this time and go through it. There's a lot of tolerance that you have, a lot of financial tolerance that you have to do when you have commissioning. When you're dealing with a larger a larger company, you kind of know you're going to have some buffers. Your typically commissioning is not going to be your only gig when you're involved in like an engineering firm or you're part of your tab. So you're going to have, it's going to be okay that, hey, you know what, for a couple of months you're not getting paid because you're going from the design phase to the construction phase, and you're just going to have to deal with it. So, but those are some of the things that I don't like with that. And then, ultimately, there's a lot of wasted time when you're sitting there and there's delays and you just have to, are you ready yet? No. Okay. Are you ready yet? No. So a lot of wasted time. That's in the cons category for commissioning. Now, on the other side, let's talk about engineering. Pros for the engineering. Even though I don't like a drawing, I think is one of those, it's sort of therapeutic. I know a lot of guys, especially, that just draft, they like to just put on the headphones, pick up some red marks and just pound out a drawing or two. And, that's how they, it's just a zone. Then it's, 5:30 rolls around and, it's time to go. So they can just kind of leave it at the office, which is definitely good. I like the art of it. This is a profession. There is art to laying out a system. There is a certain art to drawing and how it ends up looking at the end. You want to go for clarity, and clarity, if you have art, it kind of seeps through a little bit more. If you draw without any sort of process in place, it's going to be messy. It's going to be confusing. You're going to generate more issues in the field and more questions from the contractor, frankly. And obviously, you can't not list this as a pro, but you get to work in an office that's going to be climate controlled, and you have nice clean restrooms, and there's maybe like a coffee maker, or you have snacks or what have you, and that's kind of a nice work environment for people. And you get to be around other people, other engineers, other architects, sometimes, I guess, depending on what office you're at. So that is a pro to the engineering, just kind of being a little bit more, just being able to be part of something bigger. And, obviously it depends on the type of jobs. I mean, a lot of people get into engineering not knowing what types of projects that a particular firm works with. And that is an issue. I'll list that under one of the cons. Let's go into the cons. You don't know what you're going to work in, get yourself into. It might be more of, hey, if you're just doing retail, that's not very exciting. You might end up working on jobs that aren't very exciting. I've pointed out before, though, if you have a job that isn't very exciting and it's a multi-story apartment building and you screw up on one apartment, it's going to not be just one apartment. It's going to be like an entire stack. It's going to be an entire floor. It's going to be an entire building of mistakes. So you really have to focus on getting that one apartment right. So not necessarily having the most exciting projects. Cons for engineering, again, projects drag on for engineers. You have to, pick something up and then put it down, at every phase. You got your, schematic design, you got your design documents, construction documents. Each phase, there might be a couple of months. I mean, typically a design phase is going to take 18 months, but you're not drawing for 18 months. You're drawing for a couple of weeks. And again, similar to what you have in the commissioning world, you're going to have multiple projects going on at the same time. But, that's some of the cons that, for engineering. And it can be, a grind. And obviously, staring at a computer is a big downside. If you don't like sitting in an office chair, seated, or, standing desk if you're progressive, and staring at a screen, many hours a day. If that doesn't sound fun to you, maybe that's not the job for you. I mean, obviously, you get to change it up every once in a while, but the vast majority of you are drawing or investigating or doing calcs or measuring or something as it relates to that engineering project. So those are your cons. I guess as in the bonus stretch here, either way you can kind of do your own thing. If you work for yourself or you work for a company, you might be able to be an independent consultant like myself. I know other engineers that are they do just engineering, and they're a one-woman show. and that is fantastic. And it's really kind of, there's a risk tolerance to it, and you got to be able to kind of, put up with it. But, it's fun, and it's a great learning experience, and you get to kind of get the, you have the ability, I guess, either way of that option. Once you get those certifications, once you get those, the PE license, it does allow for that to be a path for you, a branch, if you will, off of your current work path. So those are some of the bonuses that I'd say. Let's get on to the second question, which obviously I think you might be able to tell from that last comment. The second question was, ideally, I'd like to get all commissioning certifications, but what is the most useful? Should I get 2 or more, or is there a nationwide certification that is most accepted? So I think here's the thing. There's more entry-level certifications now, but, I'm not really sure if they are worth it. And what I mean by that is you don't necessarily, as long as you're working under somebody who's kind of the lead commissioning person, that kind of will be your umbrella. You're working for them. Your work is directed by them. You're all fine. You may want to get it. I don't know necessarily if, depending on your certain work situation, if your company's going to pay you more to have a certification, okay, maybe, or if they're going to pay to have it, maybe that's of value to you. But otherwise, I don't know if the entry-level certification really helps. In my case, I did go for that entry-level certification, and that was just to do, because I couldn't be a really commissioning manager if I didn't have a certification. So I had to find one that I would qualify for, and that's the hard thing. When you're fresh out of school, trying to find something that you're qualified for is going to be very difficult. It's regardless of whether or not you're good at test taking or good at knowing the information that you should. Having those prerequisites, being able to at least sit for the exam, whether or not you're going to pass it the first time or not, is kind of a big deal. Now, I think I qualified most because I had the PE, I had the experience, and I had done some, quote-unquote commissioning on other projects. It wasn't sort of formal. It wasn't the lead process. I wasn't submitting anything. There was no real final report per se, but I had done some commissioning, so I could kind of vouch for a couple of projects. So that is, that is what I kind of allude to on, do I get, one of those entry-level certifications? All right, now, and up until last year, I probably would have answered, moving on from an entry level, which one should I get? I would have answered that question a little bit differently. Now that the DOE Workforce Credentialing Program has made a couple of these equivalents, so to speak. A lot of the big firms are going through. Now, if you're TAB, I guess you're going to have, I guess my recommendation, if you're coming from the TAB world and you're going for commissioning certification, you might as well stick with your with your NEB, go for the NEB certification. If you're AABC, go for the, ACG certification. If that's a possibility, I still don't know if that works with contractors or not. My only dig against the ACG certification. That's a story for another day. A great organization, great people, but as a contractor, I couldn't get that certification. And it just kind of bugged me ever since. But I think that if I had to choose, saying which one, I definitely have a preference and a little bit of bias, so to speak, for the ASHRAE BCXP certification. That's the one that I would go for. And I would also say that the BCA's certification is also good too. I think they're both fantastic. You could get away with either one. Even to the point that, because of this, I felt comfortable enough to let a couple of my certifications lapse, because I had 3. last year this time I had 3 certifications for commissioning, just for commissioning, and let me explain why. There are, depending on how you write the commissioning spec, and this is not, I should say the qualifications for a commissioning authority in the specifications or in the request for proposal. A lot of them have different, depending on where you go. A lot of them have different requirements. For the longest time with any sort of government work, you had to be either NEB, AABC, or TAB, and so they were looking at the bouncing companies to really provide their commissioning. And I really don't see that. Now with this DOE thing, it's changed a lot. So if you were a type of person that was going after specific government work back in the day, you'd have to have another certification to be able to qualify for that type of work. Would it be everywhere? No. A lot of states, still say you can be a PE. If you have the PE, that's your ticket to being a commissioning agent. Do I feel that that's right? No, but I don't think you should be necessarily excluded if you don't have the PE. So I think that again, it's not, the PE doesn't test you whether or not you're going to be a minimally competent commissioning authority. That's what these other tests with ASHRAE and BCA, that's what they do, is they test to make sure that you're minimally competent. They're all based on certain job tasks that you have to be proficient at to be able to say that you're a minimally competent commissioning authority. And so I think certification is important. I just don't think that you can get away with just having a PE, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have that PE. I know that if you're my latest look into the U.S. Army Corps specifications, the Unified Facility Guide specifications. They've been updated, and now they include like ASHRAE and BCA, as well as the different tab firms. So, and it's kind of weird too, because they did want in these specifications, they did want the firm. It was an important distinction, having a commissioning firm. I know you can be actually a commissioning firm with a BCA now. That's not something the ASHRAE does, but a lot of the tab, hey, if you're tab, you got to be a tab firm, and then you also do commissioning. So that was kind of a 1-2 punch there. However, they've kind of written it as caveat that you can leave in there. And again, it's all about editing the specs. But I say if it's in the original spec, you should at least be able to argue that, hey, you know what, it's a valid option. So there are other different municipalities, different local rules, and depending on how they write their specifications, you should be, you may be included or excluded based on what they write. But I just think that if you have that DOE recognized certification, that you should be able to kind of just step through and like get a variance on any sort of project that you'd want to get, so you wouldn't get excluded, or you wouldn't get you wouldn't get the project, you wouldn't get selected, you wouldn't get shortlisted, and it's because I still see it happening today, where people go through, and just because the specifications are written one way, or they use old specifications for Army Corps jobs or different other government jobs, that they might get selected, but then they get rejected. And that's not necessarily fair, because we've gone through this process that everybody's been brought up to the same level. If they have that recognized certification, that should be the one to get. So, I would set your sights. I would say at least know what the requirements are for the different certifications. Know what the requirements are, and maybe you can set those up as action items or a career path goal that you set for yourself as you're going forward. If there's certain requirements and saying you're like, hey, you know what, I have to have at least 2 projects or 3 projects that I've been on with commissioning, maybe there's a way that you can kind of work in on those. Again, if you're an engineer and you're saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to go and see if I can't help on this other project, just to get some experience, just to say that I've worked on the project, and I'm being truthful about it, I think that's a great way to kind of plan out your career, to be able to say, okay, you know what, here's the things that I need, here's the things that I have, and work towards those goals. And maybe, at least, especially if you say, hey, you know what, I want to get this, whether it's relevant for this job or not, this is what my career goal, my personal career goal is. And this is, I guess, if you're a younger engineer talking to your supervisor saying, hey, you know what, I know it's not on your career path for me, but it's on my career path. And if you can help me out, I really appreciate it. If you can help me out with these couple of details that I'm trying to get into. And, you never know. You never know what they're thinking. You never know what kind of discussions they're in with, their bosses or the principals or, the owners. You just don't know what people's, intents are. And I think that if you make those known, if you make your goals known like that to your supervisors, then you can go ahead and get those achieved, get those done. So eventually, I think you can make that leap into getting that commissioning certification and doing commissioning. A lot of times too, if you get at least some commissioning and you get some knowledge in your back, I think commissioning is a field that's growing to the point where there's going to be a lack of people being able to do anything. Well, I guess that's a weird way to say it, but there's going to be a shortage of commissioning authorities, I guess, is the more better way to say it. If I can use any if I can use any English at all. So, get as much experience as you can. Maybe look for different opportunities if it's not with your current firm, and look for that jump. Once you get some experience doing commissioning, and you have that certification, that's golden. I mean, I guess, some people like engineering. Some people want to be in engineering, and that's fine. There's definitely a spot for that. There's a need for that. If you want to be in a commissioning authority, there's a path for that, and there's a need for that. So either way, you're a winner. And I think that, you can even flip-flop back and forth. It doesn't really matter. I think that is a great career options, great career paths that you can choose and change at any moment, depending on where you want to be. All right. Well, I think that's it for this week for HVAC 360. Hey, thanks you so much for listening. Hope it was helpful. Again, if you're interested, if you know anybody who is interested in getting into commissioning or engineering and just kind of has those same questions, why don't you go ahead and share this podcast episode with them? I really appreciate you. And if you'd like to join our growing community, go over to HVAC360.com and sign up for the mailing list. And there are going to be some new things happening and some changes that are going to go about. So I'm putting out a survey, and thanks to everybody that's listening so far and has filled out the survey. I really do appreciate each and every one of you answering that survey. It's a very short survey. 9 questions, but it really gives kind of some perspective on what kind of information you want. And I'm talking kind of going a little bit beyond the podcast, because I'll still be producing those, but I want to produce something else. And I'm just looking for some starting points on what to do there. Again, Nestor, thank you so much for listing that review. If you want a shout out, go over to Apple Podcast. List a review there. I appreciate each and every one of those. It just helps everybody kind of the awareness of HVAC 360. So if this is of value to you, I would especially appreciate just taking the time and going over there and filling out a review. All right, well, that's a wrap for this week of HVAC 360. I'm your host, Matt Nelson, helping you go be the best and the brightest in the field of HVAC. And as always, know what you build and share what you know.